Welcome back, my friends, to AA Recovery Interviews. I'm your host, Howard L., and I'm an alcoholic, sober since January 1st, 1988, one day at a time. I'm grateful you've joined us. AA Recovery Interviews is the podcast where Alcoholics Anonymous members from around the world share their extraordinary stories of experience, strength, and hope. Listen to more than 165 interviews in this podcast series, all of which are available wherever you get your podcasts and on the website aarecoveryinterviews.com. In this episode, my interview is with Claire H., originally from London, who came to America 32 years ago, 3 years before she got sober. Growing up in England, the ubiquity of social drinking found in countless local pubs led her to start drinking at age 14. That constant exposure to alcohol, plus her father's untreated alcoholism at home, seemed to predestine Claire's future addiction to alcohol and drugs. By the time her father died from the disease at age 46, Claire had found the grief-numbing relief offered by booze and drugs. From there, her life became prey to the disease, though she managed to stave off many of its deleterious effects well into her 20s. But heroin entered the picture and accelerated Claire's abuse of alcohol. She somehow skirted the worst consequences of that deadly mix, only to find herself at the edge of the abyss at age 30. Thoroughly beaten by the disease with little reason to go on, Claire finally found the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous. Though somewhat resistant to the program in the beginning, she constantly attended meetings. That, plus intensive step work with her sponsor and service work along the way, inevitably changed the trajectory of her life to one of meaning and purpose. Claire attributes her success in the program to the same continuous work and involvement that got her sober in the first place. As an active member of her vibrant AA community, she personifies her love for the program by continually doing the simple things we tell newcomers to do if they are to stay sober. What's more, her participation in various Zoom meetings around the world has attracted many people to her enthusiastic approach towards sobriety. Claire's willingness to share her story has been a fine gift to me, and I'm thrilled to share it with you. It's a story that's both inspirational and intriguing. So please enjoy today's episode of AA Recovery Interviews with my friend and AA sister, Claire H.
Claire, alcoholic.
Hi, Claire. That's the feedback that you'll get whenever you say that in a meeting.
Yeah, it's so true.
If nothing else, AAs are very friendly people, wouldn't you say?
Pretty much.
So you're in L.A.?
I am in Los Angeles.
Why is it that so many Brits end up in L.A.?
The weather.
Just the weather?
Absolutely. It's British heaven.
How long have you been living in L.A.?
32 years.
32 years. That's about the length of your sobriety, too, isn't it?
29 years.
So you were in L.A. for 3 years before you got sober.
Yes.
I'm so glad that you were able to do this interview with me this evening. In fact, I just met you a couple of weeks ago by listening to you do a share at a meeting that we go to, a Zoom meeting that we go to, and I was so captivated by your story, I thought, this is one I need to get on the podcast.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I like to get stories that have a lot of hope and a lot of experience in them and that people can relate to. So you've been sober now, you said 29 years. What's your sobriety date?
August 29th, 1995.
What was happening on August 28th of 1995?
Let me think about that. Well, I came to AA originally, and I was drinking the first 3 months of being an Alcoholics Anonymous. And it was suggested to me that I didn't drink while I was going there, but in a very nice way. If I wanted to drink, I could still go. But I met my sponsor.
How long had you been going before you met your sponsor?
3 months.
So you were one of those who met the membership requirement with a desire to stop drinking.
Absolutely.
But it doesn't mean that you have to have stopped. It means that you just have the desire to want to stop.
Correct.
One of the women I interviewed early on in the series, she'd been coming to meetings for 5 straight years while she was drinking, in between meetings and after meetings, before meetings. And finally, whatever her turning point was occurred, and she's now sober continuously for over 30 years. She said if somebody had tried to enforce that you had to stop drinking to come into the rooms, she probably would be dead by now.
Well, it's an impossible requirement because we don't know, because we don't think we can. we might not stay sober.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important that we get to go there without conditions.
The traditions keep that alive, too. That's so important.
Correct. So important.
We were talking about the 28th of August, and did you have a big fall into AA? Did you hit that bottom of bottoms, or was it a gradual thing for you?
I did. Well, it started in the UK, and that was awful. It got worse and worse and worse and worse. So I moved to America because I knew that would be my solution. And it got worse and worse and worse.
So did you move as a geographic cure?
Absolutely, yes.
What was going through your mind when you were thinking about moving?
If I get out of the UK, a different country will make it different.
And did it?
No, I went with me.
Those geographic cures, wherever we go, there we are.
Pretty much.
So you went to LA first?
Yes.
And you continued to drink for 3 years. And then on August 28th, you made the decision, I want to go to AA.
I went before that. My ex-husband went to treatment in May of 1995. We'd been married 6 months, and he went to AA. I kept drinking and using, but I went to AA, and eventually it clicked into place for me.
So you went to AA with him?
I did. I went to his family week.
Okay, so he introduced you to it.
No, I actually had someone introduce me. There was a chap that lived on Canyon, and he took me to an AA meeting because I needed to go to an AA meeting, even though I had no idea what it was. And I was like, hell no, this is not for me. This is awful. Too much God, too much stopping drinking completely, too many people sharing things that I didn't want to know about.
So that's what you're thinking in your very first meeting?
Yep.
Oh, that's a lot of reasons not to go back.
I know.
And did you go back?
Absolutely, I went back. No other choices.
Okay, so let me make sure I've got the time frame right. You had actually started with your husband at the time who had 6 months, and you started going to AA with him. And then when is your sobriety date in relation to that?
My sobriety date was 3 months.
So you had a 3-month introduction, and you met your sponsor 3 months into AA.
Yes.
Sounds to me like you weren't very convinced when you got there.
Absolutely not. I thought it was ridiculous.
When you were drinking at that time, you said that you were going to meetings but still drinking. What were you thinking when you took a drink? Did you ever think about AA? I'm always curious whether people think about it right as they're drinking.
No, I didn't. Not then, because I wasn't in it. I was going to it, but I wasn't in it.
There must have been a lot of denial at that time.
Huge.
What did that look like? What were you telling yourself?
That I am a drug addict and not an alcoholic. Alcohol is not a problem. I'm British. I have the right to drink because that's what we do as a country. It's like a pastime. And if I could stop the drugs, I was going to be fine.
So you thought stopping the drugs would be enough and you could go on drinking?
Yeah, because what else are you going to do?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Sometimes people say that it's true in my case, that I used drugs alcoholically and I drank like a drug addict. And they were so intertwined. When I was new in AA, I used to say, my name's Howard and I'm an alcoholic and a drug addict. And then one day somebody said, well, weren't all your problems dragged in there with the alcoholism? I said, yeah, including the drug addiction. So from that point on, I just started to identify as an alcoholic.
I do too.
So when you went to those meetings, how were you treated?
Overly friendly, wanting to know your name, too welcoming. And that's what I thought.
Too welcoming.
Yeah.
Were you waiting for them to try and sell you something?
I just thought it was strange that a bunch of strangers would be like that with you.
Mm-hmm. When people came up to you afterwards, what were they saying and what were you saying back to them?
I would say my name and then I would leave and go and drink or use.
So you didn't give it very much time. You were one of those who cut in and cut out quickly.
Very much so. I was not buying what it was.
But you went back every day?
I did.
How often did you go over that 3-month period?
In the first 3 months I did. And then when I started to actually get properly sober, I would go 3 times a day.
That makes a lot of sense. 90 and 90 is what you're told in the beginning.
Correct. And I did it for 6 months.
And yet you still felt like you wanted to drink. During that period that you were still drinking and going to meetings, did people notice it? Did they know that you were still drinking?
I'm sure.
Did anyone ever say anything to you about that?
No one said anything. Only that woman, Missy, my first sponsor. who said it's probably a good idea that you don't drink.
I guess that must have made sense, huh?
It did.
At that time, you were open to it?
Uh-huh.
Would you call that a moment of clarity?
I would.
Yeah.
I thought it was not possible, but it happened.
Kind of like what your sponsor said.
Right. Because we go in and we try and negotiate, and we can't see that there's a possibility that we'll stay that sober for that long. I never thought I would get this far.
How long did you think you were going to stay sober?
Hopefully to the end of the day.
That's the way to do it, isn't it?
Pretty much.
Then you put enough of those days together, and then one day you wake up and you got 29 years. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned an ex-husband and that he was in AA. Did you guys stay married after you came in?
Oh, yeah, we did. We were married for 20 years. But the last 10 years that I was married, he was using, and it was horrible. And he couldn't get sober again. And he's still not sober.
That must have been heartbreaking.
Heartbreaking.
And you went to treatment.
I didn't. He went to treatment.
He went to treatment. You went out for Family Week.
Correct.
Those family weeks are pretty intense, aren't they?
Yeah. I was drinking. I don't know. I was good.
When I went out for a family week for my older sister's cocaine addiction, I was still using and drinking at that time. They said, "We think you're an alcoholic, but only you can label yourself." And I thought, thank God for that, because I'm not one. But they were the first people who ever said I might be one, and it was 3 months later that I came in. What was your family week like when you were out there? You were drinking, but did you get any sense that there was something going on in the family dynamic?
Well, it was just him and me that went. So I was the family.
Oh, wow.
There wasn't a family. I thought that they were very anti us and our marriage, but that was in my head.
Yeah.
He was just the worst addict and alcoholic than me. So he was the identified patient.
So they saw you and they focused on him.
Because I was only there for family week.
How long did he stay sober before he went back out?
10 years.
Did he work a good program?
He really did. He really did the first 3 years.
Uh-huh.
And then it changed. And he got sidetracked by the money, property, and prestige that we talk about.
And it took him out.
Then he had a surgery done for a hernia. He was put on pain medications, and that was it.
The opioid.
Yeah. But he was a crack addict, so he never thought the opioids would be an issue.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was a huge issue. And it still is today.
How often do you hear from him?
I don't really speak to him very often. Our son is grown up. He left with somebody, and that was okay. He did that. And then I spoke to him about 3 weeks ago because he came off of Mulholland in a car again.
Oh, boy.
I know. It's really sad.
But we know it all too well.
Yeah, he's done it twice.
He did it twice? Mm-hmm. And then we walk into a room of Alcoholics Anonymous and we hear about a whole bunch of other people who did the very same thing. It doesn't seem so extraordinary.
Yeah.
That's sad. It's sad to see somebody go through that. And we give what we can, but we can't force anybody to get sober.
You can't. And I think that idea that about having the capacity to be honest is really important. And some people don't have that.
When did you start being honest with yourself and with others in the program?
I think I lean towards honesty anyway, but I think more gets revealed as time goes on, the causes and conditions of why you use. So it was a gradual thing of more being revealed. I was grateful to know that I was an alcoholic because it didn't mean that I was awful or crazy.
You were sick and not bad.
Correct.
It's a great realization to come to.
Yeah, it was a joy.
So take us back a little bit to when you first had some of your first drinks or drinking, back maybe to your family of origin. Is there alcoholism that runs in your family?
Yes.
What does that look like?
My father died when he was 46 from pancreatitis. My great-grandfather also died of liver failure. So it's in the family. But my mum, who passed away at 95, drank every day, but not alcoholically.
Isn't that amazing?
Very different.
Do you have the desire to live to be 95?
Not really. Whenever I'm ready to go, I'll go.
No, I mean, it sounds like she had the secret or something.
Yeah, she really did. 1 drink a day, bad food, say what you think. She was great. Never exercised.
You mentioned your father dying at 46. What was life like for you when you were a kid living in a house with an alcoholic dad?
It was different because it was Britain and Dad was Royal Navy. So it was very accepted to drink. And he just drank a lot, but very happily. And we didn't talk about it. And I was young. I was 10 when he died. So it was a bit of a different age group to have a lot of clarity.
So you're 10 years old watching your dad's behavior. What were you thinking to yourself at that time?
I didn't think anything. My mum and dad drank. People that came over drank. It was part of the culture.
It makes it tough when there's a pub on every corner.
We are basically pubs with a couple of shops. That's what England looks like.
Well, it's the cornerstone of the entire social fabric, isn't it?
Yeah.
I've interviewed, several dozen British people or expats, and they all say the same thing. You know, it's just so ubiquitous.
Yeah.
Because everything is centered around it.
It is. When I was working in the UK, you drank at work, at lunchtime. You carried on drinking through the day. Then you went to the pub, especially in more rural areas.
How can that be going on so much and the society is functioning and rolling along?
I don't know. Somehow it's held together and we don't talk about it. We didn't then, for sure.
Do you have siblings?
I do. I have an older brother, 4.5 years older, complete normie, non-alcoholic, no desire to drink, rarely drinks, has never smoked a cigarette, just who he is.
Yeah, that does sound pretty weird.
I know.
And he's your only sibling?
Correct, yes.
Okay, so you got a brother who is straight as an arrow when it comes to booze and other substances, I take it? Cigarettes?
Yep.
Good, that's like a normie anchor in the family, isn't it?
Yes.
When you were a little kid and you heard the word alcoholic, what did you think an alcoholic was?
I'd never heard the word alcoholic until I went to Alcoholics Anonymous.
Really? A drunk?
A drunk is different.
Okay, so let's use drunk because alcoholic might be a little bit too staid. What did you think of when people talk about a drunk? Did you think about your dad or did you think about something else?
No, I would think about my Uncle Dennis.
What was he like?
Dennis was a big drinker, a big smoker, and he would get paralytic. But again, a lovely person.
Was he the life of the party?
Yeah. And he died on the soccer pitch with a cigarette in his hand and a pint. He was referee hit a game and then he dropped dead.
Oh, no. Did they ever put alcohol on the death certificates of the people who you know in your family who died?
No.
Always something else, wasn't it?
My father he died in Barcelona. So they put inflammation of the pancreas.
Which probably had nothing to do with his alcoholism.
Yeah, of course. But of course it did.
That's the irony of it.
Yeah.
They don't help out too much. I interviewed somebody the other day and asked them the same question. He said, yep, right there on the death certificate. This was his father, and he died of drug overdose of fentanyl and some other things. It was really sad, but it happens so infrequently that the real cause is nobody speaks of it. Kind of like England, I guess, huh?
Yeah.
Nobody speaks of it. How old were you when you took your first drink?
4.
4?
Because I was sick and they would give you brandy in milk.
How did you like it?
I threw it up. But you could drink at any age in my family.
Was that a deterrent from drinking again, that throwing up and getting sick?
No, it was what you did. Everyone drank.
When did you start drinking for effect? Maybe that's a different way to get at this question.
Probably at 14.
That seems to be a pretty common age for people. Do you notice that?
I think it just happens when it happens. I think America's drinking regulation is very late. To drink at 21 seems late to me. In Europe, it's when you're younger.
For the longest time, they served children beer. Well, this is a long time ago, I guess. There were some concerns about the quality of the water. So at 14, did drugs accompany the alcohol immediately?
I was put on Valium when I was 11 for grief, which you probably can't do anymore. I don't suggest it.
That was over the death of your dad?
Yes. So I had both.
So Valium for 3 years until you started drinking?
No, I kept on the Valium.
So it was Valium and drinking?
Correct.
At 14?
Yes, to black out.
So were you a blackout drinker whenever you drank?
Not when I just drank, but on medication, I would black out. And then I was older, I drank to sleep.
What kind of relief were you seeking at that time?
I think comfort being in social situations.
Uh-huh.
And to not have any feelings. I'm pretty sure that's what it was.
To become comfortably numb, so to speak.
Very much so.
Yeah, I drank for a lot of those same reasons. Things were horrendous in my family. I mean, it was just a violent, wicked place to be, and whenever it was I could drink and escape, it was like I still had to be there physically, but my mind could go somewhere else.
Yeah, it was great. And for boredom too. Being in a rural area, there was nothing to do, so you would drink because it was boring.
So you weren't living in London at the time?
Not at that time, no. In Hampshire.
When you go back and visit folks, do any of them remind you of any of your behavior when you were a child?
No, because we're British. We don't talk about stuff like that.
There's that card, played again. We're British. I'll have to see about getting you up on a panel where I can ask that question of like 5 Brits and see what they each say and see if it's unanimous. Oh, gee.
We don't talk about stuff like that.
You don't?
No. They would rather I didn't go to AA, so that's pretty interesting because they thought it wasn't good for me.
Why not?
They didn't know what was going on in my life. So why would you go with a bunch of strangers when you could talk to your family?
In the pub?
Yeah, it's very normalized.
It sounds like it. I mean, my next question to you was going to be one I ask a lot, and that is regarding school chums and friends who you drank with. But it makes it the way it sounds to me like you couldn't find people who didn't drink. But what kind of crowd did you hang with when you were in high school?
I was a real social isolator. I didn't want to talk to people. I didn't want to hang out with people. I just wanted to just disappear.
That sounds tough.
I think it was just a way of coping. Of feeling different, awkward, being in grief and not knowing what that was.
Fitting in.
I don't think I really cared if I fit in or not.
So, as an isolator, were you drinking mostly alone?
Absolutely. The best.
Alone?
Yes.
Did you shun social affairs where you knew there'd be a lot of drinking, or was that an invitation to go and get drunk?
I never thought about it. It was the obligation of going to certain places. And then you could go home and drink properly.
When you started driving, were there any consequences from driving while intoxicated?
It was so strange. There were these adverts on in the UK where it was you couldn't drink and drive.
Uh-huh.
And I really took that to heart that you couldn't do it. So I did not drink and drive. No idea why.
Wow, what a good girl you were, huh?
I know it's really strange.
That is strange.
I took it very seriously.
Short of blacking out, what kind of other consequences from your drinking were there?
For me, it was the emotional bottom of being a person that I didn't recognize. That was really hard. Having no ethics, no morals, not caring about my life, not caring about other people's lives.
That's a tough way to live.
What's the point of living when it's like that? It's awful.
It's always the first thing they ask when people go in to see psychiatrists and during follow-up visits. Have you had suicidal thoughts or ideations? Did you have those when you were younger?
All the time. I would rather be dead than drinking and using, and I didn't know how to stop. So I would try and die through drinking and using. It never worked. But I didn't know there was a solution.
There was something that was keeping you alive then, huh?
Obviously, yeah. I wasn't ready to go. And I've missed a lot in my life.
We often have a lot of regrets about those things, don't we?
I don't have any regrets about how my life was and is and has been. It's the way it's meant to be. That's my journey.
It's a really healthy way to think of it.
Yes, infinitely perfect.
Have you done a lot of work on that over the years? Being okay with how things were, was the 4th step revelatory to you? Was the other work that you did in the program, did it lead you down that particular path, or did you seek other outside sources like therapy and that kind of thing?
I've done both.
What did that look like?
So I went into therapy when I was about 5 years sober because I didn't believe in therapy, but I went, and it was a transformative experience. And then I went back to train as a therapist and became a therapist.
Well, so you're a licensed therapist.
Mm-hmm.
So you're one of those people who got sober, learned how to live life, and then decided to pass that on to others professionally.
I don't work in the recovery field.
Oh, you didn't?
No.
Is there any reason why?
Because the recovery area for me is sacred ground, and that's my space and my area. So I don't work in recovery. And the thought of being the authority on recovery is terrifying to me.
Oh, yeah?
I don't want to do it.
Do people seek you out when they're having their issues around their own recovery, knowing that you're a trained, licensed, experienced therapist?
A lot of people don't know that I am, because I want to go to AA to be sober myself and be a normal person in AA. I think it gets very dangerous when you get people on pedestals that are the authority on Alcoholics Anonymous, because the fall down is pretty heavy.
Well, and it's a pretty lonely place to hang out, too. Bill Wilson had a lot of issues later when he became so famous.
Yes.
And he couldn't go to meetings and just be one of the gang. Everywhere he went, he was treated like, I'm an alcoholic, but you're a better alcoholic. And it really bugged him. He had some bouts of depression over that.
Yeah, you would too. He was correct. If it feeds into ego, it can be disastrous.
We'll be right back. My friends, if you're enjoying AA recovery interviews, I invite you to check out my latest audiobook, Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how more than 100 men have recovered from alcoholism. This is the word-for-word, cover-to-cover reading of the first edition of the Big Book, published in 1939. It's a relaxing yet meaningful and engaging way to listen to the Big Book anytime, any place. Have a free listen at Audible, iTunes, or Amazon. While you're there, search for my other audiobook, Lost Stories of the Big Book, 30 original stories from the first and or second editions missing from the third and fourth editions of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's an engaging audiobook that brings these stories to life for AA members who've never seen them. These timeless testimonials were originally cut to make room for newer stories in the third and fourth editions. But their vitally important messages of hope are as meaningful today as they were when they were first published. Many listeners will hear these stories for the very first time. It's also available from Amazon as a Kindle book or in paperback if you'd like to read along. You're going to love it. And we're back. The disease I've found over the years, Claire, has a tendency to kind of rear its ugly head from time to time. It gets together with my ego, and I'm particularly susceptible in times of difficulty. Does that occur for you? Does that happen?
It's a life, isn't it? So sometimes it's going to be difficult. It's not a climb all the time. It varies because that's life. Recovery varies on a day-to-day basis.
So things got bad enough for you that you quit. We're talking about coming from where you came from, with the parents that you had, with the experiences that you had growing up in a place where it's not talked about, but it's certainly not sacrosanct. Or maybe it is sacrosanct, I don't know. But you arrive at adulthood. How many years into your adulthood did your drinking work for you? Was it right up to AA?
Probably up until I was 21, and then it didn't.
Only up to 21?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess if I did the math, I could figure out. So you had a number of years after 21 where you were having real problems, and then you came into AA.
9 years. And I got sober at 30.
So you had 9 years.
Yeah, of hell.
When did they start going to hell on you?
When I was 21, it was not good anymore. And then it was in a cycle of drinking and using and spending all my money on drugs and alcohol. And that's how I moved up to America, because that was a solution.
And this is while you were still drinking and using, and your husband at the time was in AA?
No, he wasn't. We got sober together.
Oh, okay, at the same time.
Correct.
Yeah, I'm just trying to wrap my head around what that must have been like. An endless cycle, it sounds like.
Awful.
What was your drug of choice during all that time? Was it still Valium?
Heroin.
Did you shoot it?
No, I snorted it or smoked it. And then when I met my ex-husband, he was a crack addict. So I started on crack, and then it was game over.
Crack is really wicked, isn't it?
It really is. And it makes you crazy. It's a tough drug.
I know quite a few who had issues with crack and cocaine to a much greater degree. And they always said that crack was so much more destructive than the heroin.
Oh, it is.
In what ways?
You lose days. You lose days. You start it and it's 3 days later. It's nuts.
And you haven't had any sleep?
No, you don't sleep.
You don't sleep at all, huh?
Mm-mm.
I would think you could get psychotic pretty easily living that kind of lifestyle.
Very much so.
So whenever you felt that way, what did you do?
I would use heroin to take me down off of the crack and then drink and then go back and do it all over again.
When you see people out there doing that, which part of your experience have you found when you're talking with people who are actively still using is most useful or powerful when you're talking with people who want to get clean and sober but who are not?
Hope.
Hope. In what way?
There's hope because if I can get sober, anyone can get sober. A non-believer in 12-step program, an isolator.
So you're one of those who has the best, worst story, huh?
Correct. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. So 9 years of this continual, endless, vicious cycle. What did it do to your health during that time?
I think it was more was mental health and a huge drastic weight drop. And because I was an overweight kid, I was happy that I was so thin. But I was 5'9" and 97 pounds. It's not a good look.
Wow, it certainly isn't.
It's not good.
Because I was an overweight kid. I always used to think that was the ultimate goal in life.
Was to be thin.
I just want to not be fat anymore because it was a tough existence.
It's horrible.
And so you flipped on that and you went to the anorexic side of things, huh?
Only because I couldn't eat because of the drugs.
Oh, jeez.
And at first it seemed great, but it wasn't great. I thought I looked good, but I looked awful.
Well, if you check out any of the glamour magazines these days, most of those women are 5'9" and about 95 pounds, aren't they?
Well, I think it's changed. Body image has changed over the years. And more body types are acceptable. I think it depends. But in my era, absolutely.
So as you were getting sick and needing the heroin, when did you first tell yourself, I've got to stop this?
Not being able to die, wanting to save his life, and complete chaos. And being locked in houses and not leaving for months, not having access to anything, not having access to money, hanging out with dealers, and all the craziness.
And on the outside, how did it look to the outside world?
No one knew me. My family were in England. I didn't know anyone here. It was very convenient.
It's hard for me to imagine you in that type of framework.
I know.
And even knowing you for just a very short period of time, from hearing your story and interacting with you right now, it boggles my mind how that could be, because you seem so vivacious and so energetic and enthusiastic about AA, and that kind of stuff carries over into life. So my guess is that you've got an AA type life, which is very, very cool.
I do. But you don't know what AA is until you are actually in it.
When you came into AA, how long was it before you started sponsoring other women?
I think I was about 5 years sober. I did other service work. I did H&I, had commitments at meetings, but I started sponsoring when I was about 5 years sober.
How's that experience been for you?
Amazing.
In what ways?
Because you see people come alive. And you also see things that end really badly. But if you attach to the hope to see people's lives change and their characters change, and to understand what this is one of the greatest gifts you can ever have. But it's the greatest gift that you'll have, and you realize how much wisdom you have once you start sponsoring. And it's not my wisdom, it's AA's wisdom.
It is collective, isn't it?
Very much so.
What's the most prevalent piece of advice that you give people in AA?
Stay, get commitments, go to meetings regularly, 90 and 90, work the steps, main advice or suggestions.
Yeah, those are good suggestions. I mean, my feeling is you can never go wrong by quoting the big book, choosing a topic out of a big book for a meeting, or telling an AA, a newcomer or somebody who's new in sobriety, more meetings, more meetings. I always tell people, if the only thing you do is not drink and go to meetings, first of all, you can't get drunk if you don't drink. That's a binary thing. I mean, it's either on or off. But if the only thing you do is go to meetings, in those meetings, you're going to find out the other things that you should be doing.
You do, but you need to follow it. It's interesting how we seek through prayer meditation. It's not like if you fancy doing it, it's a directive.
What do you mean?
It's like it tells us to do that. It's part of the steps.
Yeah, it tells us to be of maximum service to our fellows.
Correct.
I always have a difficult time talking to people about their own spirituality. I mean, I can talk about my beliefs and what higher power means to me, but sometimes people want answers I can't give them on that, and I feel strangely like, wait, I should have this experience, but yet all the experience in the world doesn't change the fact that my relationship with my higher power is mine and mine alone. And the fact that he shares me with others is very, very cool. But as far as knowing what to tell others about that spiritual connection, it's always a challenge. What do you find when you think about that?
It is, but going into AA itself is a spiritual experience. It's like a holy ground where all these people come together for a greater purpose, for a greater purpose of common good.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really important. And how I know there's God is I see how God works in other people's lives. You sit around and watch.
What was your spiritual life like before you got to AA and when you were growing up?
I was raised Church of England, which doesn't really mean anything. We don't really do anything. We do good Christmas. We do a good Easter. You get christened, where your parents get cake and alcohol. So I didn't really have a spiritual background.
So church-wise, religious-wise, but when you think about whenever it was that you first thought about the existence of a power greater than yourself, did you ever have that inkling or flash of God's presence in your life before you got to AA?
I truly believe I'm divinely protected. So I've always felt there's something. Even though I'd like to argue there's nothing.
What does prayer look like for you?
Sometimes I hit my knees in the morning. Not always, but always in prayer. We walk in prayer. We observe it.
So you actually pray on your knees?
Sometimes, not always.
I did that for the longest time. And people would say, Howard, despite the fact that you're Jewish, and most Jewish people don't pray on their knees, but outside of that fact, why would you pray on your knees? And I say, when I roll out of bed in the morning, go straight to my knees, while I'm praying, I'm feeling the hardness of the floor against my kneecaps. I have a tactile feeling for what I'm doing means I'm in prayer.
Well, it's a practice. It's an honoring process to stop, observe in a very busy world.
What's the biggest obstacle you think that most people in AA face?
I think seeing God so much and thinking it's a God program, therefore cult or religion, and doing it their way.
Did you feel that way when you came in, that it was a cult?
No.
I came in and I saw the God on the steps, the little window shade things that pulled down, and said, God, God, God. Even I completely disregarded the words as we understood him, that personal choice to believe or not and create our own image. But I just thought, okay, there we go again, another program where they're trying to just jam their beliefs down my throat. I was resistant I wouldn't say the Lord's Prayer for a while there. And then it occurred to me, because my sponsor was a very spiritual guy, and Mike said, the prayers aren't for God's ears, they're for your ears. You're affirming something that's already taking place. And I got that, and my understanding was boosted to that very personal relationship with a power greater than myself.
What I love is people's negotiation about picking what they want to do when they're fighting for their life.
Well, that's usually how it goes, isn't it?
Always, yeah.
Have you ever had a situation where you immediately stopped and thanked God afterward, saying, thanks for steering me out of the way during that what would have otherwise been a head-on collision or getting hit by a bus or some kind of serious disease? Do you recall the last time that you did that?
I don't know whether that's about God for me, because that's just about life. You can have great things and awful things, but I don't think that's about God. It's just the way it is.
Maybe God sets the stage for all of that, but stays out of the direction.
Maybe, but I don't think he's up dishing out stuff, treating one person differently from the other. But it's making meaning and sense out of the messages. whatever happens in our life, what is the spiritual teaching about that situation?
How do some of your experiences being a therapist and having the knowledge of how people's minds and emotions work, does that help you, or how does that help you in your own program?
I don't know whether it does help in program. I think you just experience more lives and more situations. And some people are inspirational and some people not. But with alcoholism, when you see alcoholism, it's usually so obvious the way the brain works. Denial, rationalization, blaming. It's a pattern, you see it. I don't know about you, but you see people come into AA and you get a feeling about who's going to stay and who's going to go. The willingness. The most important thing is willingness.
I've caught myself doing that from time to time, thinking about the guys I thought wouldn't make it. And now here they are 15, 20 years on, and they're still making it.
Wow.
And it's so wonderful to watch.
So great. But we never know.
We never know. So what have the last number of years been like for you, weaving AA into your psyche and into your life?
AA's first, but it's been for many years that AA's been part of who I am. It's in my soul now. The thing that I didn't want, I have. It made no sense to me.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, it just happens. Sit around long enough, it just happens.
Yeah, you stay alive, and if you don't drink and you don't commit suicide, you give God a chance to work in your life.
Correct.
I always feel like AA has enriched my life beyond my wildest dreams.
It's insane what we get. We get everything through Alcoholics Anonymous. Our lives unfold. We have meaning and purpose. It's just the most phenomenal thing ever. How lucky are we? The thing that we didn't want, the place we didn't want to go, becomes the most important things in our life. And it's always there. In an ever-changing life, it's always there. The stability.
Yeah, and the beautiful thing about it, Claire, is that we could live to be 1,000 and never have all the experiences that you need to live the kind of life that we're leading, right? So we go to a place where there are others who have that experience for us. And that's why I always tell people whose lives are going really, really well and they start cutting back on meetings because they're so successful that they're so busy. And in Houston, there are, 2,200 meetings a week. You can literally go to a meeting at any time of day or night. But I tell those people, you need a meeting. It sounds almost counterintuitive. I walk up to somebody whose life is going really well, and I say, you need to go to more meetings. It doesn't sound right. Everything's going great in your life. Why would you go to more meetings? And what I say, and what I believe in my heart of hearts is, people have to see other people succeeding in AA. They also have to see other people get through some of the worst stuff human beings can endure and staying sober. The only place you're going to get that is at a meeting.
But the problem is their focus is off. They're chasing that rather than being in AA. Both can happen. Once you start looking at that stuff and it's also good, it changes. Life changes.
It does, and it's always interesting for me to watch some of the older guys I've known in the program who've come to the meetings, and some of these people, especially because Houston's an oil town, some of these people are just like unbelievably wealthy, and yet at the end of the day, they're still an alcoholic, and all of their money in the world didn't do anything for that.
Of course. You can't buy recovery. It's work. If not everyone that goes through treatment would be sober, and they're not.
My thing with treatment, Claire, is that treatment centers do a great job of getting people sober, but if the handoff to AA at the end of it is not strong, anytime I hear somebody say, I've been in 8 rehabs, I'm thinking, well, what was there in the first rehab that turned out not to be true that you had to go to the second rehab? I ask people when they slip.
You have to go to AA.
You know how it is when you see somebody slip who you've been listening to for months or years, and all the stuff they say sounds so good, and you think, this person will never get drunk, and then they go out. I always say to them, of all the things you talked about as being true and certain in your life, what stopped being that way for you? And usually it's about, I stopped doing the things on a daily basis, like going to meetings.
It's always not going to meetings. That's the biggest thing. I stopped going to meetings. It's huge.
Has there ever been a time that you didn't go to meetings during your sobriety?
Nope, never.
Now, you mentioned a grown child.
Yeah, 25, 26. He was 26 yesterday.
Oh, congratulations. Your 26th anniversary of his birth.
Yes.
At what age did you start talking about alcohol and drugs?
Well, he was in the AA meetings as a baby. I used to take him with me. He's been to so much AA. It's really sad. All around the world, I had to take him.
That's how it was for my wife. That one of the reasons she doesn't drink today is because when she was 4 and 5 years old, sitting in AA meetings, coloring on the floor in the back, that something about that infiltrated her psyche, and she never wanted to drink.
Or she knows where to go to.
Or she knows where to go to.
And then when my son was 10, when his dad started using, it was obvious. And he would go to family weeks and do children's programs. He understood it.
So we help the next generation to survive and learn from us the things that they need to improve their own lives and the lives of others.
Well, we know so much more now. As a public, we know more than we did.
It's amazing to think that we are just a few generations into AA. You know, 90 years ago, Bill was walking across the Mayflower Hotel lobby in Akron, and here we are today. This has been a marvelous talk. I really appreciate getting to know you, and an amazing woman.
Thank you, Howard.
When I hear about the kind of recovery you've got, I can't think of anybody listening to this and saying, I don't want that.
How could you? I'm a skeptic, and I don't believe in anything, but it's a transformative experience.
So you know what to tell people who are skeptical about AA.
Absolutely, I do. But do you want to get sober? Are you willing to go to any lengths to get it? I am. Yeah, because you work for it. We work for AA, and AA works for us. You're not there to take.
I don't know who around the world is going to hear this podcast. There are many, many people in all different countries. Most of them are here in the U.S. A lot of them are in L.A. I still go to an L.A. meeting.
Yeah, perfect.
Well, I want to thank you so much for doing this today, Claire. This has been a real treat for me. I appreciate you spending so much time. Is there anything else that you'd like to add that you feel needs to be said right now and needs to be said by you?
You have nothing to lose by going to AA. If you think you have an issue, go. And you're not able to buy recovery. You have to go to recovery and show up for yourself and others, of course.
That should be codified on a sign somewhere. Maybe a little bit too long to post on the wall, but I get it.
But anyone can do this.
Well, you did it.
I did.
I did it.
Today.
Yeah, a day at a time.
And you're today.
Many, many thanks for doing this, Claire.
Thanks, Howard.
Take care of yourself.
Yes, hon. Take care, babe.
Love to you, too.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Well, my friends, that's a wrap for today's episode of AA Recovery Interviews. I want to thank my guest, Clara H., for sharing her story, and thank you for tuning in. If you've enjoyed the interviews in this podcast series, will you do a little service work by spreading the word about this rich and meaningful listening experience? This show is another helping hand of AA we can all extend to alcoholics everywhere. AA Recovery Interviews is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, and other podcast providers. And if you want to contact me directly with any suggestions, simply email howard@aarecoveryinterviews.com. Please also take a minute to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. By the way, this podcast strictly adheres to AA's 12 traditions and all General Service Office guidelines for safeguarding anonymity online. I pay all production costs, and no one receives financial gain from the show. AA Recovery Interviews and my guests do not speak for or represent AA at large. This podcast is simply my way of giving back to AA, that which has been so freely given to me. The next episode of AA Recovery Interviews is on the way, so keep coming back. It'll be here soon.